Hi, everyone. It's Friday, November 10th, 2023, and you're listening to Radio Free XP. I'm joined by my co-host, Jesse Alford.
Hello.
And today we're talking to Alex Tran.
Hey, everyone.
So, Alex, we were chatting on the Pivot Slack, and, hey, you started a new UX design shop, and come on the show because we want to hear all about it. But as we did share, everyone who comes on the show has got to tell us how they got into this crazy business. So how did you start in XP? What is that first few weeks like for you?
Yeah, thanks both of you for having me on the show. As y'all introduced me, I'm Alex, he and pronouns, was a pivot in the Seattle office for a long time, and now have, after working in startups for a while, now have my own independent practice. And my journey to XP and pairing was a little bit similar to others, but also slightly unique. So Rob Me actually was a advocate and funder and partner to Code for America, where I worked many, many, many years ago in San Francisco. And a lot of, how Pivotal ran teams influenced a lot of how Code for America hired and implemented basically balanced teams in the city governments that we supported, building kind of alpha apps and digital services for governments around the United States. And so, it was a really funny shared DNA thing that happened where sometimes I go over to the Pivotal SF office and be like, oh, this feels a lot like the Code for America office. We must have got it from you guys. And then sometimes Rob and other people would come do talks at Code for America, or Jen and Tim O'Reilly would come over. Jennifer Polka and Tim O'Reilly from Code for America would come and do talks at Pivotal. And so I got a lot of exposure that way. Even though Code for America was a much younger organization than Pivotal, we took a lot of the playbook of how teams were formed, kind of respect for all the different disciplines, product managers, engineers, designers, data scientists, in how we set things up. And so that really stuck with me throughout my career being a UX designer. And so, fast forward to 2017, I ended up moving to Seattle with my partner. And I didn't even know that there was a Seattle Pivotal office. I just knew that Pivotal had a presence many places. And then when Andreas Eichen, my friend now, but a long time ago, just a presence in a designer Slacks in the ether, posted that there was designer openings in the Seattle Pivotal office, I was super stoked. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I didn't even know there's a Seattle office. And so I applied, and I had a great interview experience. It was the best. It's still to this day the best facilitated interview experience of my entire life. Shout out to my once manager, Salome Mortazavi. And, of course, besides doing pairing in my interview, doing design pairing and doing, a whole whiteboarding session with a balanced team, I also did play a round of ping pong and represented myself fairly well. And that, kicked off my career at Pivotal. And so, Tony, you asked about those first 4 weeks. I had a really comfortable onboarding, and I really credit that to being steeped in kind of the milieu or atmosphere that Code for America had inherited from Pivotal. And also Eric Reese was a funder supporter of Code for America at that time too. So there was just a lot of energy and support for working in a way where, the entire balance team was involved, in an XP fashion. And so, my first 4 weeks at the Pivotal Seattle office, just kind of really naturally, from my perspective, connected with, working in pairing stations with engineers, with other designers, with PMs. And I think, it was just a fantastic experience. And one thing, I'll just call out one thing before I pause for any of you all's thoughts. I just did as a contract that I did actually for another ex pivot. I did a UX foundations training. And one of the things that I emphasized to these kind of new designers was balanced teams, and I actually had an all X pivot balanced team panel to help them think about this. And some of my slides was literally like, hey, when you think about collaboration, you're collaborating with every one of these folks, but also like, what does pairing or what does collaboration work like design to PM, design to engineer, right?
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of times, and this is, I think, a very crucial missing piece of UX education in the undergrad and grad level, and also in among the other disciplines as well, is that we don't emphasize enough like what those situations look like, how to create um, good kind of foundational interactions between those disciplines, between different like working styles, thinking styles, whatever. And so I see a lot of like career transitioners and junior designers really struggle with those kind of initial setbacks of almost like the shock of like, oh, I've only collaborated with other designers, coming out of school. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't ship software like that. Like
Right. That's
right? And so that's just something that like I think I was just really fortunately like in my previous work experience and other things before coming to Pivotal, like I just had and also that kind of formative experience at Code for America, like I had seen that play out like hundreds and hundreds of times. So when I started at Pivotal, I was like, oh yeah, like obviously, like I'm gonna hang out with my, engineers as much as they need me to, and then go, then solo again. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So you said pairing many times. So I'm going to ask some naive
Yeah, yeah,
questions.
yeah, please.
Okay, you're a designer. What does pairing look like
Yeah.
when you're pairing with? What does designer pairing look like?
Oh, I love this question. Okay, so Nina Mehta, a long, long time ago, she was a pivot in the SF office. She wrote a great article, I think, about this. Um, and so I definitely recommend people go check out her article. I think it's on Medium somewhere. But for me personally, there's a few different modalities of designer to designer pairing. And some of them are very similar to the other disciplines pairing together. But for designer to designer pairing, if that's what you're asking, Tony, there's a lot of different roles that people can play off each other, right? So like sometimes in a design to design pair, one person will be the diverger and one person will be the converger, right? Which, hey, ooh, sparkly. I'm seeing sparkliness. I don't know why that's happening.
It was worth it for that. That's good. I had no idea about this designer pairing model. It makes tons of sense. I can't wait to hear more.
Yeah, yeah. So in that model, right, like, which is kind of echoing or reminiscent of, when you think about like the double diamond of design or whatever, the big framework that, we talk about to people who don't have a design framework that they build off of. Um, Oftentimes one person is generating, right? They're generating optionality, they're generating roads to go down. And then the converger, right, is helping them talk about constraints, talk about like trade-offs, talk about costs, right? And, when we talk about pairing, separate from design or any other discipline, we talk a lot about like reduce cognitive load, better like thinking, better critical thinking, right? And one of the ways that the converger, diverger kind of two brain split helps is that it releases one person to be like just like in it, like going wild with generating. Because some people are very good at that piece. Like for example, like I actually had to do in UX grad school, I had to do like a personality assessment around this. And I was like, Alex, you are a very strong generator. I was like, okay, cool. And, I don't know how accurate this is, but, some people just enjoy that piece of it more. And right. And some people enjoy the more convergent part more. And so sometimes you compare people together and like move really quickly, right? And get to your best guess, like next step out of the many options that you have, right? And so in that just like micro interaction, you are almost mimicking like a lot of little tiny double diamonds just like in your pairing interaction. That's like one modality of pairing, right? For a designer to designer. Another one is like just very tactical, right? Like I might be in a Figma file and someone else may be like my human co-pilot. I feel like in the era of GitHub Copilot, there's a lot of connotation with the word co-pilot, but like, with like, if we're getting at the very tactical level, right, we're not like kind of ideating big things on a whiteboard. Like I might be in a Figma file and like, control V, like a few different options. And like someone might be like, what if we bring in this component, or like what if we juxtapose these two things? So they're actually ideating or like almost like auto-filling into my brain things as I am pushing things forward. And so like that's like another modality of design pairing for me, where it's like I'm pushing the train forward, but you're like my awesome like guardian angel, fairy, whatever, and you're like seeing, you know, a bunch of lumber on the train tracks and you're clearing it for me, like,
Yeah.
or you're like, wow, Alex, like I'm gonna go find you some coal to make this train go faster. Like they're giving me fuel, right? They're fueling me up, or vice versa, right? And so those are some of the things that I think are some mental models I have around design to design pairing, that I find really effective.
You're listening to Radio Free XP. I'm Jesse, and we've got our guest, Alexander Tran.
Okay, Alex, you're running through how designers might pair and might work together. I'm gonna try to rappel down the rope just a teeny bit more. I would love to hear about when you went from not really pairing, whether it was Code for America or wherever, when you worked solo, and then you discovered pairing as a way of working. Can you take us through that part?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit of a weird duck in that, like, I actually always prefer to be in a pairing modality, or like with people in, even if it was kind of a lightweight, like mobbing style, right? Like, for those who don't know what mobbing is, it's like, it might be like just hopefully a gentle free for all of a particular problem. And so, soloing is oftentimes more cognitively difficult for me. And so, like, I think for me, before I was doing a lot of pairing or kind of like high collaboration with people, I think I was always like searching for a way that I would be like collaborating. And that's why like I'm in like 80 Slack channels, and I think I've like started in the Pivotal Slack, like a freelance stand-up Slack. I've like always trying to have fast feedback cycles and iterations and things, because I just feel like I think better. And so I think like, my journey kind of pre-Pivotal was a lot of like working in organization, but not always having like a structured pairing setup, or like kind of deep soloing and like feeling kind of lonely in that modality. And like I don't like being dogmatic about anything. And so, for me, it's not like a strict Boolean of like must be pairing or all the time and or not, or it's not. It's more just like I always like to have the option, right? And then be able to like opt out of it if it doesn't work for, everyone consensually in the project. And so it's kind of like, organizations where there's a healthy setup for pairing and that we can do it and that it's encouraged and there's psychological safety for everyone to do it. Things just move so much more smoothly and like better. Just like, and I think for me, to your question, Tony, like the remote aspect, right? Like when I was working all the way up through 2017 before I joined Pivotal, like mostly, in-person work, right? And then I started working remote a lot in a startup before I left San Francisco in 2017, because we had distributed teams in Serbia and elsewhere. And so I I started to build up a muscle of collaboration in remote, not always quite pairing, although we eventually did get there. And then like, fast forward to Pivotal, and then clients who wanted to collaborate remotely, even before the pandemic. I think like being able to turn on that collaboration easily and with less friction on remote became like a really strong advantage entering into the pandemic, because I did a big project for a very large Fortune 100 company. And one of the things I was brought on to do was to help my design pair create a good remote design sprint practice. So she was going to enable their Brazil and India teams after, 4 weeks with me. She was going to do it and run it and do it for the entire Brazil and India teams. And she did. But we practiced pairing in person at her office for the first 4 weeks, and then rolled into remote pairing, me from Seattle, her from the middle of the country, afterwards. And I think that really set us up for success because we had that human connection. And then we were like really ready to go remote wise.
I have several questions
Please.
about this. My first one is maybe the most boring, but when you talk about doing remote pairing as a designer,
Yeah.
what tools are you using to enable that collaboration? Like what software and what combinations have you tried?
Yeah.
And what has worked well and what hasn't?
Yeah. So I think, right, outcome wise, and I was just telling this to a designer that I mentored, because I am a local mentor here at a UX school out of Seattle, School of Visual Concepts, shout out. You always want to situate the collaborators against the problem. And what I mean by that is in physical space. And so like in person, actually, it can be harder to do this, but in remote, it can actually be easier. And so like, for the example of the tools, right? Like Zoom, if you're sharing a Miro board, if everyone's looking at the Miro board, and that's something that I emphasize in my UX foundations training, is like you are helping pull stakeholders or collaborators as like on the same team. And when you emphasize that we're a we, it's we against the problem. And so like that the real magic happens when those tools like Miro or like any kind of screen sharing like Zoom helps position that work, that problem, like as something that we're all kind of looking at, almost like in physical space across from.
When you say it's harder in person, I have an idea of what you mean that I want to test my understanding.
Yeah,
with
please.
you. So like, all right, so you've got yourself a conference room and you're collaborating with people up against this whiteboard. I picture success in orienting everyone against the problem as 2 or 3 people leaning against the table facing the whiteboard across the one-step space towards the whiteboard, and failure as people sitting around the table turning their heads to look at the whiteboard. Does that comport with what you mean, or
yeah?
is there more to it?
I love the visualization of your example. That's super helpful. Yeah, I think the anti-patterns that I see oftentimes with the facilitation in person that doesn't have anything to do with like necessarily the skill of the people, but the extra friction that the environment can provide is that like you want people while you're doing something to feel empowered to be as engaged as possible. So to your point about the round table, Jesse, like sometimes the orientation of the table may just make it really hard to see. Like I have seen so many designer presentations and many others, which are also simply not accessible or inclusive, right? So like when you're in a physical conference room, like I always tell my design students, I'm like, you have to design for the person at the back of the room, right? Like AVUX is one of my biggest pet peeves because I have so much appreciation when it works well, because there are so many actors, right? Non-human actors, right? There's like all the physical devices. There's like all the mics. There's all the mic coordination. Like there's all the videos. There's all the video syncing. And so I have so much appreciation for both the engineering feat that it is and like all the UX work that comes in. And so like when I see that happen in person, and this is also my gripe with like hybrid work, is that you make very unequal players, right? Like because then if you have people on the screen and there's a mural board on that screen, it's also very hard to see who has the baton speaking in the room, right? And so it becomes this thing of you're not all a team against the problem. You're a fragmented, like multi-headed hydra, like maybe sometimes looking at the problem. So I think your question about tools is actually not as boring as you purport, because it's really about how do the tools support that, like that dynamic, that, at least in my humble opinion, like where you support that outcome of everyone feeling as a team against a problem. And I honestly don't think that the tools are all there yet to help us in the current situation.
I did hear Miro in your list of things that just like natively produces this experience. And I just note that my experience with it is that often people will set aside or minimize even whatever video call software they're using and not even be looking at each other, just looking at the problem. And that has some trade-offs to it, but it works. Once the thing that you're working on in Miro becomes the face of the problem, like, you've gotten somewhere.
Yeah. And, I wanted to pen an article, alpha named The Whiteboard Wars, for a very, very long time, because I just find it fascinating how all the whiteboard softwares are trying to eat each other. Like when Mural rebranded to Mural from whatever it was before, or Mural rebranded from Real Time Board, and there's also Mural, and then and I'm just like, and now Miro is trying to crib and like kind of solve a little bit of what you're saying, Jesse, right? By like having native video inside of Miro, so you can have little bubbles of faces, kind of like Gather Town, where, I don't know if you guys know that, like it's almost like an RPG for meetings.
Well, no, this is the thing that I've said for a long time is like, oh, Microsoft is over here talking a big game about AR, but they have Minecraft. They should be putting blocks in Minecraft that let people join or leave Skype rooms. They have all the pieces, but they have no imagination.
No, they no. Or the imagination that they have is extremely siloed into little fiefdoms. Yeah.
You're listening to Radio Free XP, and we're talking to Alex Tran.
So you have a UX practice that is the nominal reason that you're on here. We make everyone do the pairing journey thing because they're all so good, and we just want this giant library of people's experiences with it. But you have a particular interest. You have something you want to tell us about. What is it?
Yeah, I think, Tony and I were talking a lot about kind of where UX is now and where UX is going, kind of in this current environment. And I think there's a few different layers there that we can interrogate a little bit within kind of the history of like how we've worked together and like as X pivots and in other places. Just taking it from the top, we've been in a very funky place in tech, right? And like UX, along with a lot of other roles, has experienced like a lot of layoffs, a lot of weird things. And then I think, just in my personal perspective, I think we're going to see a lot of great UX practitioners and UX groups and teams with really strong UX practices kind of resurge out of whatever is happening right now in the larger industry. But I do think one thing that would be really great to double down on, just for everyone who works with designers, is just understanding the different types of like designers there are and the different ways that a UX practice shows up. So right now I run an independent consultancy, but before I was a principal designer and anchored the UX practice at the food waste startup Shelf Engine here in Seattle. And, what I have to provide day to day in-house at a startup is vastly different a lot of times than what I've had to do for each of my clients. I think a lot of times people who are not used to working in an XD fashion, not used to working kind of very hand in hand with designers at a company or on a consulting engagement, very often the only exposure they've had to working with designers is in a very production design faculty. So someone who has just been brought in, they're not valued for their critical thinking or as a thought partner. They're just like, make this Figma file. make the thing, make it,
Give us we're blocked on the design for the login screen. Provide us with the pixels so that we may make the screen.
Ooh, yes. And I've had projects like that, and it is just excruciating because I can see the pain echoed inside of my engineer's eyes and my eyes and everyone else's eyes except for whoever called for this system. And so
right. You're sitting there looking around and seeing everyone suffering and being like, why are we doing it this way? But you can't get into that because that's not what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah. And so, and it's a lot of times the clients or people, some who are very good hearted and mean very well, like they just have no other language other than experiencing production level design. And when I say that, I in no way mean to like denigrate, any product designers, UX designers who love like production design work and are very good at it, and have made a career in it. That's great. But
may I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
When you say production design,
yeah,
it sounds like you're talking about something that could be in many different relationships.
yeah,
But it's like, hey, we've already decided what to build, and we want you to give us a visual blueprint for it, a wireframe. They probably wouldn't use the term blueprint ever, but like some level, and fidelity might vary, but basically that when you say production, what I'm hearing, and I'm disambiguating it because production can mean so many different things and is often meant in a very positive sense. But like you're talking about this sort of reduced to like fill a brief. I often think of this as the agency work style.
Exactly.
Okay, that comports with your...
Exactly. The agency model is where it kind of has a lot of its roots, but actually like Airbnb and like Netflix and lots of great, like a lot of places that have, great software internal shops in many regards, have production designers. But it's like within, if you're thinking about like healthy teams and like set up well, it's within like a coordinated system within a whole mature design team, right?
Right. Like they've built an internal agency.
Yes.
Is what I've seen at a lot of these places.
Right. And like if everyone's consensual and everyone's having healthy communication and everyone is like supporting each other, that's great. What's not great is when like product owners and software architects or like people who are buying the services of design only understand design is doing that, and they have not included design in any strategy, any decision making, anything, and they're just like, here's my handkerchief, now make the pretty happen, and it's like, it's fascinating. It's just fascinating, right? It's like my partner and I are rehabbing this 100-year-old craftsman house, and he's a PM, or was for a long time in software, and I'm a designer, and we both have like varying levels of construction skills. And it's so funny because we're like, okay, a lot of this project is very waterfall, but at the same time, like there's so many like little micro decisions along the way and things we want to capture, somewhat in agile fashion. And it's like, oh yeah, why wouldn't you include more points of view disciplines up front to like figure these things out, and like, and so, it's really fascinating. So, I feel like the industry still, after so many decades, still has this mental model that like we designers are these artifact, stampers. We just cut widgets out of steel and like, blah, and it's right. It's like there is a time and a place for production design within a very mature shop or within very fast agency life. There's someone who is doing this amazing finishing work because they have to, because someone has to receive like this very well detailed and this very clean Figma file for some reason, for some reason. And like,
it's very generous. I'm actually gonna say I don't think that this has to happen. Like except for the fact that the world is the way that it is and things are the way
it's not how I want to work, Jesse.
I just want to say, like, it's generous and it's nice to people who are doing that type of work, and doesn't devalue their contributions or come with this like, oh, you're living your whole life wrong thing. And that's all good, and a lot has been accomplished that way. But I think that a better way has come along, and I think that better way or some other better way applies to almost every situation. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
If you're experiencing this and thinking like, oh, maybe I'm in the situation where it's the right thing to do, maybe.
No,
but I don't believe
I
that.
appreciate I appreciate your perspective. For myself personally, I would never work that way, right? And like I refuse it. I rebuke it because it doesn't work for the way I work, but it also, like, to me, doesn't produce great software on a team. Like, I think for me, I just recognize the reality that is the mental model. It was given to them historically by certain ways of working, and it's stuck. And there's still people who work that kind of way, some of whom do great work, which you and I both acknowledge, but like,
absolutely,
it's not my preferred way of working. And then the fact that it influences how people think, like, writ entirety of like the entire industry, it influences how they think of the whole thing. And so that's why, I was talking with Tony, like, what kind of design collaboration, what kind of design work, to me, if people were having good, nuanced conversations about this, like in a very healthy and fast way, they would think about it along a spectrum of maturity, and they would think about it in terms of like both product and brand. And so I was talking with Tony, I advise early stage climate tech startups as just like a side thing in my practice. And, entrepreneurs will come to me and they'll say, Alex, like, first design hire, what should I focus on? And I said, what's the leanest brand that you can have? Are you there yet to attract like the customers you need to survive and or to raise your next round? And they said,
yes.
Right. And they said, my brand is not there. And I was like, okay, then if you are providing the service and it's glued to duct tape together, but you will survive another day, but your brand so crappy that like no one will buy you, then you need to have brand help, right? But if you're saying that your brand is okay because you're in B2B EV charger charging, you know what I mean? And like no one's gonna give a damn about your brand very much at that level. It has to be enough, right? Lean.
Right.
Right. But you are like, the UX, the actual experience of like going through onboarding, using the service, whatever, sucks, then you actually really want to lean into a UX generalist at that phase of an early, pre-seed, like seed, pre-seed, like early Series A startup, in order to really set those good foundations for yourself. And so those are the types of like nuanced conversations that I wish people were having in their hiring, in their setting up their teams and all of that, because then you can set everyone up for success. You can give designers work that they want to do, that they are excited to do. Because a lot of what I mentor my students around is like, when they're looking at jobs and stuff, is like, are you a 0 to 1 person? You can be many of these things, or you could change in your life. But like right now, are you a 0 to 1 person? Are you someone who likes to architect the change it from, the early stage startup stuff to like something that can scale? Or are you someone who likes to like ride it out, more of a maintaining situation, like after, some initial scale stuff? Because the type of design work is very different. It's very different at those levels of maturity, right? And then it's also different kind of along another axis, how much product, how much brand. And some designers love doing both. Some designers only like doing product stuff and not brand stuff. And so it's really, I think it's really important to have those decisions like amongst stakeholders and the team, because your needs change over time.
You're listening to Radio Free XP. I'm Jesse Alford, and we're here talking with Alexander Tran. I think also that we are just about out of our time envelope. Where can our listeners find you?
Oh man, I don't really use Twitter anymore.
Yeah, right. Me neither. It's a problem.
Yeah, you guys can find me, Alex Tran, on Blue Sky. Also, I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, those are kind of the places that I'm at right now. And
if our listeners are on the Pivotal Slack, can they find you there?
Yeah, Pivotal folks. I'm
the
in
Pivotal
there.
alum Slack.
Yeah. Please come find me in the Meet Seattle channel, the designer channel. Love to hang out.
We'll also launder emails to you if people want to email either Tony or I and pass it on to a guest. We don't need to be broadcasting everyone's email address if they don't want it to. But you can email me at jesse@nonlinear.garden. Tony, what's yours these days?
Precept@gmail.com.
All right. So if you want to talk with us about the show or have us pass a note to Alex or anything else, feel free to email either of us at either of those addresses. Alex, thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, thanks, guys. Yeah, it went by really fast. We were having
we ran out of time faster than we wanted to. Well, the good news is that we can always do more.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's so much fun topics we can dive into more, and I think
tease some of those. People will tell us if they've got one.
Yeah. So
what else? What's the library that you represent?
Oh my gosh, the library. Let's go. Okay, so we scratched the surface on a bunch of different things. One is, I think, where's design going after this current era, right? Like a lot of teams are moving out of in-house because in-house teams are being demolished in a lot of places. So what is the future of like consultancies, agencies, single proprietors like myself? What kind of helpful maturity will that give or not give to the tech industry? Because UX first made some of its biggest splashes in tech by actually being external and being a forcing kind of feedback function on some of the bad stuff that was coming out of big companies.
The adaptive path story.
Adaptive path, exactly. That's exactly who I was thinking about, right? And so, like, some big hitters came out of there that now all have their own small shops or are leaders at bigger in-house places. But so I think there's like the evolution of the field, and then there's a lot of evolution around the craft. Like, how will we think about good human computer collaboration? Like, I love the Centaur mental model or like framework of like AI plus humans equals maybe better kind of thing. Like, I think that's really worthy of talking about. And then something really close to my heart, like, in my undergrad, I studied a lot of environmental science, and I have a lot of Climete Tech startup friends, and then I've been getting to know some funders as well in the climate space, and I think there's still very much a dearth of designers in that space. So I'm always trying to encourage folks, and I always want to talk to folks about that. And then also like just general like upskilling, up leveling of our education in just climate related things as a whole, like obviously the tech industry, but also just people in general. Like, I think there's a lot that like all of us, if we're just talking about just even X pivots, like that we can contribute with the ways that we think and the ways that we work. And it's just going to become more pressing and tangled of a problem set as time progresses. So I like to give people lots of heads up and lots of like nudges around it.
This is the thing I tell people sometimes, how painful it is to be in a group when you've recently been with pivots and they figured out what to order or where to eat, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. And then you go and you're with a normal group, and they're just in this chasm of hell trying to figure out what to do together. They're not better at the other things they're doing in the world. The other coordination and decision and facilitation and aligning, they're not doing better at that either. The meal thing is fully indicative, and we have a lot to offer. Tony was saying to me earlier today, I think pivots have been really successfully trained to really control their arrogance and keep that sort of tamped down. But I think there's some room for self-esteem on this. We know a better way, and there are things that we can contribute it to. So I love that, and I'm sure we'll want to have you back for one or more of those things in the future. Thanks again so much for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks you both for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Radio Free XP. If you're interested in helping with graphics, bumper music, or other aspects of production, or if you'd like to be on the show, please contact Jesse Alford or Tony Hansmann on the Pivotal Alum Slack. You can also reach us via email at jesse.alford@pm.me or precept@gmail.com, respectively.